Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang. My heart sank as I saw the number on the screen. An unknown hospital number. "Mrs. Thompson?" the voice asked. "We have your husband, Mark, here. He's been in an accident." I barely caught my breath, the world suddenly spinning. "How bad is he?" I whispered, my throat tightening. "He's stable, but he's unconscious." I couldn't even process the rest of the words. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone. I ran to my car, feeling like a stranger in my own body, my mind racing with horrible thoughts. My husband, the love of my life, was somewhere out there, alone, in pain, and I was powerless. I prayed, hoping for a miracle. "Please, let him be okay. Please, don't let it be too late." My world felt like it was crumbling, but I was determined to hold it together for him. When I arrived, everything was a blur. Doctors moving quickly, nurses rushing past, and machines beeping in the background. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I needed to see Mark. I needed to be with him. I rushed to his room, where his fragile form lay unconscious, connected to tubes and machines. My heart ached as I stood there, my fingers grazing his hand. "Mark," I whispered softly. He didn't respond. I sat beside him, holding his hand, waiting for him to wake up, desperate for him to remember me, to remember us. The next few hours felt like days. I watched his chest rise and fall, hoping it would bring him back to me. When he finally opened his eyes, I held my breath. His gaze locked with mine, and for a moment, I thought he recognized me. But then, he blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice weak but clear. My heart shattered. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Who are you?" My world stood still. Mark, the man who knew every inch of me, every memory, every moment we'd shared, now looked at me like a stranger. I felt the ground beneath me crumble as if I were sinking into an abyss. "Mark, it's me. It's Jessica," I whispered, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I couldn't help the tears that welled up in my eyes. His confusion deepened, and he blinked several times, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something familiar. "I don't remember you," he said, his voice soft, but it stung like 1,000 knives. His words were gentle, but they cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. How was it possible? How could the man I loved, the man who held my hand during every triumph and heartbreak, have no memory of me? The doctors explained that his accident had caused amnesia, erasing his memories, and they couldn't predict when, or if, they would return. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I tried to be strong, to hold it together for him, but inside, I was crumbling. "I'm your wife," I said, trying to make him understand. He stared at me blankly. "I don't remember being married to you." Days passed, and each one felt like a small eternity. Mark's memory remained as elusive as ever. I brought him our wedding photos, old letters, anything to jog his memory. But no matter what I did, he couldn't recall the life we'd built together. One day, as I sat by his bedside, I noticed someone new, a nurse named Emily. She was kind, patient, and always there with a comforting smile. I couldn't deny it. She seemed to have a natural connection with him. I watched as she spoke to him, her voice soothing, her laughter light. Mark smiled at her, and for the first time in days, it felt like he was truly present. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but a part of me burned with jealousy. She was starting to fill the space that had once been mine. "It's okay, you're doing great," she said to him one morning, her hand resting on his arm. I couldn't help but feel a pang of something I didn't want to acknowledge. He was beginning to rely on her more than me. I tried to push the feeling aside, but it grew harder as the days passed. It was becoming increasingly clear. Mark wasn't trying to remember me. I was fighting for our past, for our memories, but he wasn't. Instead, he was slowly opening up to Emily, the nurse who had become his constant companion. Every day, she was there, comforting him, supporting him through his recovery. They laughed together, shared quiet moments, and I watched from the sidelines, feeling more and more like a stranger in my own marriage. The pain was unbearable. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. Every attempt to bring back the man I loved felt futile. One afternoon, I sat quietly in the waiting room, watching them from a distance. They were sitting together, talking as if they had known each other for years. And maybe they did, at least to him. I don't want to forget. He had told me a few days ago, his eyes full of sadness. But he was forgetting me. I don't want to forget her, he said now, looking at Emily with eyes full of longing. My heart cracked in two. One night, after a long day of seeing Mark and Emily grow closer, I finally broke down. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it was killing me inside. I went to his room, feeling the weight of the moment in every step. "Mark, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up from his bed, his expression warm but confused. "What is it, Jessica?" he asked, and I almost couldn't recognize the man who had once known me so well. "I'm still your wife," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was with you through everything. I am your life, and I need you to remember that." He looked at me with a softness in his eyes, but there was something else there too. "I don't remember," he whispered, "but I think I feel something for Emily." I froze. The words sliced through me like a blade. I had been holding on to hope that one day he would remember, that our love would return. But hearing him admit that he felt something for her broke me. It felt like losing him all over again. After Mark's confession, I didn't know how to breathe. I had hoped that, somehow, we could rebuild, that his memory would come back. But hearing him say he felt something for Emily shattered me. I had been fighting so hard to hold on to the life we once shared, but now it felt like I was fighting against something that couldn't be undone. "I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy," he said quietly, his eyes filled with sorrow. I couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the man I loved slip away from me even further. "You're not," I whispered, though every part of me screamed that I was losing him. I turned away, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay, not if it meant watching him fall for someone else. But could I really walk away? Was I strong enough to let go of the person I had promised to love forever? Days turned into weeks, and Mark's attachment to Emily only grew stronger. I could see it in the way his eyes brightened when she entered the room, in the way they shared quiet conversations that left me feeling like an outsider. Emily wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just doing her job. But every time I saw them together, my heart broke all over again. She was kind to him, gentle in a way that I couldn't deny was soothing. But she was also becoming more than just a nurse to him. I started to wonder if he would ever see me the way he saw her, if I would ever be able to find a place in his heart again. I watched from the door one evening, the two of them talking softly, her hand on his shoulder. He smiled at her, and it was like a dagger to my chest. I wanted to be the one to make him smile like that again, to remind him of all we had shared. But he was slipping further from me with each passing day. I tried everything I could think of to get through to Mark. I spent hours with him, talking about our life together, our wedding, the trips we had taken, the nights spent laughing and loving. But every time, he just looked at me with confusion, as if he couldn't piece the memories together. "I'm sorry, Jessica," he said one evening after I had finished talking about the time we went to Paris for our anniversary. "I want to remember, but it's like a blank slate." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had tried to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. I could feel it. He wasn't fighting to get his memories back. In his mind, he was creating a new life, one that didn't include me. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was time to let go. Letting go didn't mean I loved him any less, but it meant I had to accept that he had fallen in love with someone else. That someone wasn't me anymore. One evening, as I sat in the hospital waiting room, Emily came to find me. Her face was soft, sympathetic, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but resentment. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She sat down beside me, and for a moment, the silence between us was thick. "You know, Mark talks about you all the time," she said, breaking the silence. My heart skipped a beat. "He does," I whispered, not understanding. "Yes. He remembers flashes of you," she continued, her voice calm but tinged with something I couldn't place. "He just doesn't know how to piece it all together." Her words felt like both a lifeline and a blow. Maybe there was hope, I thought. Maybe he wasn't entirely lost to me. But Emily's next words hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. He told me that he feels like he's falling for me. I froze, the air thick with the weight of her confession. It felt like I was drowning, not just in my own sorrow, but in the bitter reality that I was losing him forever. The days bled into one another, and with each passing moment, the pain of losing Mark grew heavier. I watched him grow closer to Emily, and I saw the way his eyes softened when she was near. I felt like a shadow, lurking at the edges of their new life, unable to find my place. It hurt, more than I could ever describe, to see him fall for someone else. But as much as it tore me apart, I knew I couldn't keep fighting for a love that no longer existed in his heart. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was knowing that the person I loved, the man I had built a life with, had chosen someone else. As I stood by his hospital bed one last time, I looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done," he said softly, "but I think I need to be with Emily now." My heart shattered, but I nodded. "I understand," I whispered, though I didn't. I turned away, my chest tight with grief. This was the end. I knew it was time to leave. I had been holding on for so long, trying to fight for a marriage that had slipped through my fingers. But now, with Mark's decision clear, I couldn't pretend anymore. I packed my things, my heart heavy with the weight of all the memories we had shared. I thought about our first date, our first kiss, the day we moved in together. It all felt like a lifetime ago. The love I had for him hadn't disappeared. It was just buried beneath the pain of his decision. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I wondered if I would ever love anyone the way I loved Mark. I didn't have the answer, but I knew that I couldn't keep waiting for someone who didn't remember me. My love story with him had ended, and I had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant leaving everything behind. The days after I left Mark felt like an endless void. I tried to carry on with my life, but everything reminded me of him. The smallest things, a song, a scent, even the simplest gesture, would send waves of grief crashing over me. I stayed away from the hospital, knowing that seeing Mark would only tear open wounds I was struggling to heal. But each day, I could feel the ache of missing him in my bones. I never imagined it would end this way, with him forgetting me and falling in love with someone else. It felt like a death, a slow, painful goodbye. I hadn't just lost him to another woman. I had lost him to a version of himself that no longer remembered the love we shared. And yet, despite everything, I still loved him. The thought of him with Emily was unbearable, but I couldn't stop wishing things had turned out differently. I wasn't ready to let go, but somehow, I knew I had no choice. I ran into Emily a few weeks later, by accident, in the grocery store. She looked just as calm and composed as ever, a quiet strength radiating from her. She smiled when she saw me, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Jessica," she greeted me softly, her voice laced with a hint of sympathy. "How are you doing?" It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times, but now, hearing it from her, I didn't know how to respond. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the unspoken understanding that we both shared a bond with Mark, one that was now a tangled mess of emotions. "I'm getting by," I said, my voice shaky. She nodded, looking down for a moment. "I just want you to know, I never meant to come between you and him." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. Of course, she hadn't meant to come between us, but she had. "It's not your fault," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's just life." A month passed, and as much as I tried to move on, the ache of losing Mark never fully faded. He had moved on with Emily, and I had to accept that our story was over. I didn't hear from him, not that I expected to. In his new world, I was nothing more than a fading memory. The heartache was crushing, but I had to find a way to heal. I thought back to the life we had, all the memories we'd made, and for the first time, I realized that I couldn't live in the past forever. It hurt, but I had to let go. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting that sometimes love just isn't enough. I took the first step in moving on. No more waiting for him. No more clinging to the hope that things would change. I packed up my emotions, wrapped them up in a box, and set them aside. It was time to say goodbye, not just to Mark, but to the version of myself that was still holding on. It wasn't easy, but eventually, I found myself starting over. I moved to a new town, away from the places that reminded me of Mark. I found a small apartment, decorated it with the things I loved, and began building a new life for myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Slowly, I started to find joy in small things again. Morning walks, coffee with friends, even a new job that made me feel like I had purpose. I wasn't sure if I would ever love again the way I had loved Mark, but I was starting to believe that I could be happy even without him. As the months passed, the pain lessened. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding peace with the way things were. And though I would always carry the memory of the love I had for Mark, I knew that I had to keep moving forward. It was a year later when the phone rang again. I wasn't expecting it, and when I saw the number on the screen, my heart stopped. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was important. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. "Jessica?" The voice on the other end was familiar but strained. My breath caught in my throat. "Mark," I whispered. I couldn't believe it. It had been so long since I had heard his voice. He sounded different, older, more uncertain. "I don't know how to explain this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I've been thinking about you, about everything we had. I don't know what happened. I need to talk to you." My heart raced as his words sank in. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. Mark and I met at a small cafe in the town I had moved to. He looked different, tired, but there was a glimmer of the man I once knew in his eyes. We sat across from each other, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was speechless. He reached for my hand, hesitating before he spoke. "I remember," he said softly. "I remember everything. Our life together, the love we shared, and the way I hurt you." My heart twisted at his words. "Mark, how did you remember?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "I've spent the past year going through therapy, trying to piece together my life. And the more I thought about it, the more I remembered you. But it wasn't until recently that I realized how much I had hurt you." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Mark and I talked for hours that day. We spoke about everything, our past, our mistakes, the love we once had. He admitted that he had been terrified of losing the new life he had built with Emily, and in doing so, he had let me go. But now, with the clarity of his memories, he knew what he had lost. "I can't undo the past," he said, "but I want to try. I want to be with you again, Jessica. I've never stopped loving you." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to scream at him for leaving me, for choosing someone else. But the other part of me, the part that still loved him, couldn't deny the truth in his words. "I don't know if we can go back," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to try." It wasn't easy. It couldn't be. There was so much hurt, so much lost time that we couldn't get back. But slowly, with each conversation, each moment spent rebuilding trust, we began to find our way back to each other. Mark and I decided to take it one step at a time, to let the past be what it was, but not let it define our future. We both had scars, he from the accident and the years he had forgotten me, and me from the heartache of watching him fall for someone else. But in the end, love was worth fighting for, and we both knew it. The days after Mark and I decided to try again weren't easy. We had a lot of emotional work to do, and it felt like we were walking through a fog, unsure of what would come next. Mark's memory had returned, but the scars of his time without me were still fresh, and so were mine. We spent quiet evenings talking, not rushing through anything, just trying to understand what had happened. Slowly, I started to see the man I had once loved, strong, kind, and caring, begin to emerge again. But the trust we once had, the foundation of our relationship, had been cracked. It would take time to rebuild it, and we both knew that. It was frustrating, but we were willing to put in the work. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that's all I could ask for. As we moved forward, there was still so much unspoken between us. I could feel it when we were together, the weight of everything that had happened, lingering in the air. Sometimes, Mark would look at me with a sadness in his eyes, as though he wished he could undo the hurt he had caused. Other times, I would catch myself lost in thought, wondering if things would ever truly be the same again. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the love I still felt for him. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but we had shared something beautiful once. And maybe, just maybe, that could be enough to start over. One evening, as we sat on the porch, I reached out and took his hand. "I don't know what the future holds," I said softly, "but I'm willing to find out with you." He smiled, a small, sincere smile that gave me hope. "Me too," he whispered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page again. Even though Mark had apologized, even though he was doing everything he could to make things right, there was a part of me that couldn't fully forgive him. I wanted to. I truly did. But the pain of watching him fall in love with someone else, of seeing him choose Emily, was still fresh in my mind. I couldn't forget the months of emptiness I had felt, the loneliness that had crept into my heart when I realized he would never be mine again. It wasn't just the memory loss. It was the fact that he had built a new life without me, one where I didn't exist. We talked about it often, and each time, I felt a little closer to forgiving him, but it wasn't easy. I knew it would take time for me to heal completely, but I also knew that love wasn't just about forgetting the past. It was about moving forward, together. As months passed, Mark and I found a new rhythm in our relationship. It wasn't perfect, but we had both grown in ways we never expected. He became more patient with me, more understanding of my needs, and I started to let go of the anger I had been holding on to. We didn't talk about Emily much, and that was okay. I didn't need to know every detail of what had happened between them. What mattered was that we were rebuilding what we once had, and it was starting to feel like a second chance. We spent weekends together, rediscovering the small moments that had once made our love so special. Simple things like cooking dinner together, watching movies on the couch, and even laughing at silly inside jokes that only we shared. We were learning to be a couple again, and it felt like we were falling in love all over again, piece by piece. One evening, we decided to reconnect with some old friends. It had been so long since we had socialized, and I realized just how much I missed the warmth of their company. As we gathered around the table, there was laughter, stories, and a sense of familiarity that was both comforting and bittersweet. Mark seemed at ease with everyone, and I could tell that he was starting to feel more like his old self again. But there was also a moment of awkwardness when someone brought up the past, the accident, the memory loss, and everything that had followed. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on us, and for a moment, I worried about how it would affect us. But then Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a quiet gesture that reminded me that we were in this together. "We've been through a lot," he said with a small smile. "But we're doing okay now." The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the warmth in my chest. Maybe we weren't perfect, but we were stronger than we had been before. And that was enough for me. There were times when I would catch myself staring at Mark, watching the way he moved, the way he laughed, the way he looked at me with eyes full of love. I would still get lost in my thoughts, wondering how we had gotten to this point. How had we gone from a life filled with so much love and happiness to the pain of losing each other and rebuilding everything from scratch? But then I would remind myself that we were here now. We had made it through the darkness, and though there was still work to be done, there was also so much beauty in the journey we were on. We had learned the hard way that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about weathering the storms together. And with Mark by my side, I felt like we could face anything. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Emily. My stomach churned as I read her message, unsure of what to expect. "Jessica, I hope you're doing well," it began. "I wanted to reach out and apologize. I never meant for things to turn out the way they did. I just wanted to let you know that I've left town and I won't be in Mark's life anymore. He's in good hands now, and I hope you two can find happiness together again." The message was short and to the point, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had always wondered about Emily's role in our lives, and now, it seemed like she had made the decision to step back. I showed Mark the message, and he nodded silently, looking thoughtful. "I'm sorry for everything, Jessica," he said. "It was never about her, not really. It was about me forgetting who I was and what I had." I took a deep breath. "It's over now," I replied softly, "and we're moving forward." We had come so far, but there was still one thing I needed to know. I needed to ask Mark the question that had been burning inside me for months. "Do you ever regret what happened?" I asked him one evening, our voices soft in the quiet of our living room. Mark looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "No," he said after a long pause. "I regret hurting you. I regret losing you for a while. But I don't regret the journey we've been on. It's been hard, but it's made us stronger. And I wouldn't change the fact that we're here now, together." His words brought tears to my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Mark and I had been through so much, and while our path hadn't been easy, it had led us back to each other. And that was enough. As the months passed, I realized something important. The future wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it. Mark and I had both grown, not just individually, but as a couple. We had faced the unimaginable, and now we were stronger, more aware of how fragile love could be. Our days were filled with moments of quiet understanding, of sharing little victories and small setbacks. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first met Mark, and neither was he. We had both learned to cherish the moments we had, not take them for granted. We had no guarantees. Nothing in life was ever truly certain, but together, we were building a future. A future where love wasn't something that could be taken for granted, but something we nurtured every single day. And that felt like the greatest gift of all. There were days when everything felt normal again. The awkwardness from the early days of our reconnection faded, replaced with the ease of being with someone who truly understood you. I would wake up in the morning, and Mark would be beside me, his arms around me, and for a moment, I'd wonder if any of it had really happened. Had we really gone through all that pain, all that heartache? But then I'd look at him, and I'd know that we had. And we had come through it. Together. The moments of doubt still crept in, but they no longer controlled me. The trust was still being rebuilt, one step at a time, but the love was strong. And I knew, with a deep certainty, that it was enough. We had both learned how to live in the present, not get stuck in the past. Though we had found peace, life wasn't always easy. We still had our moments of doubt, and our trust was something we both had to work on every day. There were times when the shadow of the past would cast a long reflection on our relationship, but we learned to confront it, to talk about it, to reassure each other that we were moving forward. Mark had changed, but so had I. We both carried scars, but we also carried a newfound respect for each other and the love we shared. Sometimes the road ahead felt uncertain, but together, we had proven that even the most difficult trials could be overcome. Our love was no longer perfect, but it was real, and that was all we needed. As time passed, Mark and I began to take small steps towards rediscovering the version of our love that had once been so vibrant. We went on dates again, tried new activities, and shared more quiet moments than we had in the years before the accident. Our conversations became more open, more honest, and while we both occasionally hesitated, we learned to trust in each other again. One evening, as we sat together in our backyard, the sky painted in hues of purple and orange, I looked at Mark and realized something important. No matter how much had changed, there were parts of us that would always remain the same. "I love you," I said quietly, my voice full of emotion. He smiled, the kind of smile that made everything feel right in the world. "I love you too," he replied. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that deep sense of peace, knowing that we had survived, knowing that we had found our way back to each other. Not long after, something unexpected happened. While going through some old boxes in the attic, I found a collection of letters and photos from when Mark and I had first started dating. The letters were filled with our hopes and dreams, things we had written to each other during the early days of our love. I couldn't help but smile as I read through them, remembering the excitement, the joy, the anticipation of building a life together. I shared the letters with Mark later that evening. He was surprised to see them, and as we sat together, reminiscing, I realized how much of ourselves we had lost in the years of struggle, but I also realized how much we had gained. "We've come a long way," I said softly. Yes, we have, Mark replied. And in that moment, I knew we were no longer living in the shadows of the past. We were living in the future we were building together. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, and we had learned that the hard way. But as we moved forward, we both had a sense of calm that we hadn't felt in years. We had faced the worst of it, the loss, the pain, the heartbreak, and we had come out stronger on the other side. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. The road ahead was filled with possibilities, and though we knew challenges would come, we were ready to face them. Together. As long as we had each other, there was nothing we couldn't overcome. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in us again. Mark and I stood in front of our new home, a place we had bought together, a symbol of our new beginning. It had been a long road, but we had finally made it. As we unpacked boxes and settled into our new life, I realized just how far we had come. The journey wasn't over, but it was just beginning. And this time, I was ready to embrace it, every step, every twist and turn, every challenge, because no matter what happened, we would face it together. Our story wasn't one of perfection, but one of resilience, love, and the strength to overcome even the darkest times. And as I looked at Mark, I knew that our love story was just getting started. In our new home, we started to create memories that didn't feel like they were attached to the past. The walls, though freshly painted, began to hold the essence of our life together. We shared quiet mornings over coffee, celebrated small victories like fixing a leaky faucet or planting our first garden. With every passing day, I saw Mark not just as the man who had forgotten me, but as the man I was falling in love with again. He had his flaws, and I had mine, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the space we had created together, a space where love wasn't defined by what we had lost, but by what we had found again. Time, it seemed, was the greatest gift of all. It had healed our wounds in ways we couldn't have imagined. But I knew we had to cherish this time. It was fragile, and we had both learned not to take it for granted. Despite the peace we were beginning to feel, there was still one thing that haunted me: the fear of repeating the past. I would often lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was just fooling myself. Could we really start over after everything we had been through? Could love truly survive the scars of the past? Mark would often sense my restlessness and would hold me close, whispering, "We're not going back. We've learned. We're stronger now." But even his comforting words didn't always silence the doubts in my mind. I couldn't shake the fear that someday, something might happen again, something that could tear us apart. And what if we weren't strong enough to survive it? It wasn't a constant worry, but it would visit me in the quiet moments, when the world was still and I could hear the pounding of my own thoughts. One evening, as I stood in front of the mirror getting ready for bed, I realized something important. The fear that had been gnawing at me was just that, fear. It wasn't based in reality. It was based on what had happened, on the past. But we were no longer living in that space. We were no longer trapped by the version of our story that had been defined by memory loss and heartbreak. Mark had changed, and so had I. The past no longer had the power to control us, unless we allowed it to. I wasn't scared of repeating the past anymore. I was scared of not fully embracing the love we had, of not living in the moment we had built together. It was time to stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for something to go wrong. I turned to Mark, who was sitting on the bed, reading a book. "I love you," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, smiling softly. "I love you too." And in that moment, I knew. We were okay. We would be okay. Just when I thought our lives were settling into a peaceful rhythm, Emily reached out once more. This time, the message was different, more open. "Jessica," it began, "I know I've already apologized, but I feel like I need to say it again. I'm leaving town for good. I just wanted to say that I hope you and Mark find the happiness you deserve. I never wanted to hurt you, and I realize now how much I did. I'm letting go now, for both your sake and mine." I read the message over and over, trying to understand why she was reaching out again. But this time, there was no anger, no jealousy, just a deep sense of closure. Emily was choosing to move on, to let go. I looked at Mark, who was now standing beside me. "She's letting go," I I said quietly. And so are we. Mark nodded, his expression calm. We have everything we need right here, he replied. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the past. Emily had been a part of our journey, but she wasn't a part of our future. Even though things were better, even though we had reached a place of peace, there were still times when trust felt fragile. Every now and then, a moment would arise. Whether it was an old habit I'd noticed or a small uncertainty that crept in, and I would wonder, even if just for a second, if we were truly past the worst of it. But we both worked to face those moments head-on. We talked through our fears, no matter how small or silly they seemed. We realized that trust wasn't something that was built once and for all. It was something that needed constant care. It was like tending to a garden. It needed patience, understanding, and a willingness to nurture it every single day. So we did. And little by little, the pieces of our relationship that had once been shattered began to fit back together, stronger than before. One Sunday afternoon, as we walked through a park near our home, I saw something that made me pause. A couple, older than us, holding hands, walking side by side, content in each other's company. They laughed softly at something, and their joy was contagious. It hit me then, with a quiet force, that I didn't need grand gestures or perfect moments to know that Mark and I had something real. Our love was not defined by the extraordinary, but by the simple, everyday moments we shared. And that was enough. I looked at Mark, who was smiling down at me, his hand holding mine. "Do you see that?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied, his voice soft. "I do. And I hope we can be like that. Just together. Happy." I smiled. "We already are." Months later, Mark and I sat in front of a small cafe, a place we had come to love, a quiet little spot where we had started making new memories. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant, "about the future, about us, and what comes next." I felt a flutter in my chest. Could it be? Was he thinking what I was thinking? "What are you thinking?" I asked softly. "I think it's time to take the next step," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a sense of certainty. "I want us to build a family, a life, that's ours. No more looking back, just moving forward." I felt tears well up in my eyes as I looked at him, my heart full. "Yes," I whispered, "let's do it." And in that moment, I knew we were truly beginning the next chapter of our lives together. And so, with hope in our hearts and love as our guide, Mark and I began building the life we had always dreamed of. There would be challenges ahead, of course, but we faced them with a confidence that came from the strength of our love and the lessons we had learned along the way. The future was no longer something we feared. It was something we embraced together. As Mark and I settled into the rhythm of our new life, we realized how much we had grown as individuals and as a couple. It wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the small ones that built the foundation of our relationship. The way he always made sure to hold my hand when we crossed the street, or the way I would surprise him with his favorite dinner after a long day at work. These little gestures were our language, our way of saying, "I love you," without using words. One evening, we celebrated a small victory. Mark had received a promotion at work. It wasn't life-changing, but it was a step forward. We shared a quiet dinner, laughing over the challenges that came with both of us working full-time. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. It was the beginning of something more. Our life together, no longer defined by the trauma of the past, but by the hope of what was to come. Despite the peacefulness we had found, something inside me was stirring. I had spent so many years focused on Mark's recovery, on rebuilding our marriage, that I hadn't really thought about my own growth. I needed to rediscover myself, to understand who I was outside of being a wife, a caregiver, and a partner. I brought it up one evening, sitting across from Mark at our kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand. "I've been thinking," I said, "I want to do something for myself, something that's just for me." He looked at me, curiosity in his eyes. "Like what?" "I don't know yet," I replied, "but I feel like I've lost a part of myself along the way. I need to find it again." Mark smiled softly, a look of understanding on his face. "Whatever it is, I support you. You deserve to find that part of yourself again." His words filled me with gratitude. I didn't know what that journey would look like, but I knew I had his support, and that meant the world to me. Over the next few months, I started exploring different interests. I enrolled in a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had never had the time for. I spent weekends volunteering at a local animal shelter, something that gave me purpose outside of my relationship. Each small step was a reminder that I was still my own person, with dreams and passions beyond the life Mark and I had built. But the more I discovered about myself, the more I realized that these things weren't separate from my relationship. They were a part of it. Mark noticed the change in me. I became more confident, more sure of who I was, and it started to strengthen our bond. We supported each other's growth, and that was something I had never anticipated. I had always believed that love meant losing yourself in someone else, but I was learning that true love meant growing together, while still maintaining your individuality. Just as I was beginning to feel comfortable with my new life, something unexpected happened. I had missed my period, and the thought crept into my mind like a quiet whisper. It was a thought I hadn't entertained before, not seriously. I was still figuring myself out, still focused on our journey of healing. But as the days passed and the thought lingered, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I took a test, and when I saw the 2 lines, my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure how to feel, nervous, excited, overwhelmed, scared, all of it at once. I didn't know what this meant for me or for Mark, but I knew one thing for certain. Our lives were about to change. I found Mark in the living room, sitting on the couch, reading a book. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked up, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to pure joy. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "Yes," I said, a smile slowly spreading across my face. "We're going to be parents." In that moment, everything felt different. We had come so far, and now, we were embarking on a new chapter. A chapter that neither of us had expected. But we were ready. The news of my pregnancy brought a new energy to our home. We spent hours talking about our future, imagining what it would be like to become parents. There were a million questions. What would the baby look like? Would they have my eyes or Mark's laugh? But beyond the curiosity, there was something deeper, something unspoken, that we both felt. This baby wasn't just a new life we were bringing into the world. They were a symbol of everything we had been through, everything we had overcome. It was as if life had given us a fresh start, a chance to begin again, to build something new and beautiful from the ashes of our past. I could feel Mark's excitement growing with each passing day. He was already talking about baby names and what kind of parent he hoped to be. And while I was filled with excitement, there was also a part of me that was terrified. Could we handle this? Could we be the parents this child needed? But as Mark placed his hand gently on my growing belly one night, I realized something important. We didn't have to have all the answers. We would figure it out together. As the months passed, I found myself looking at Mark in a new light. There was a softness to him now, a tenderness that hadn't been there before. He would talk to the baby, his voice gentle, as if he already knew the little one inside me. We had changed so much since the accident, since the heartbreak, and now, we were changing again. We were no longer just a couple trying to rebuild. We were becoming a family. And in that transformation, I could see the love we shared was deeper than I had ever imagined. The struggles we had faced, the pain we had endured, were no longer just memories of the past. They were part of the foundation of the love we had built. And with every passing day, I grew more certain that we were exactly where we were meant to be, together, facing the future with hope, love, and anticipation. The day our baby was born was nothing short of miraculous. The moment I held our child in my arms, I felt a love so profound, so overwhelming, that nothing else mattered. All the struggles, the pain, the doubts, it was all worth it. We had made it. We had built a life together, one that was strong, full of hope, and ready for whatever came next. Mark stood beside me, his hand gently resting on my shoulder as we looked at our child. "We did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "We really did it." I nodded, tears filling my eyes. Yes, we did. Our journey wasn't perfect, And it wasn't easy, but it had been ours. And as we began this new chapter, with our baby in our arms, I knew that we were exactly where we needed to be, together, stronger than ever, with a love that had survived it all.